3 people are dead, 11 are infected. A French woman is alive only because a machine is breathing for her. A Spanish passenger is locked inside a military quarantine facility in Madrid. Passengers from 23 different countries scattered across South Africa, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Spain, and France are under strict medical monitoring. And the clock is ticking because the incubation period for this virus can stretch up to 8 weeks, meaning people who are on that ship and feel completely fine today may not be fine tomorrow, or next week, or the week after. The ship is called MV Hondius. The virus is called Andes Hantavirus. And what is unfolding right now across multiple continents is the most alarming outbreak of a rare and deadly pathogen since COVID-19 forced the world into lockdown. The difference is this virus kills up to 38% of the people it infects. And unlike almost every other hantavirus on Earth,
this one can spread from person to person. Here's the angle that every health expert is quietly terrified about, but nobody is screaming loud enough for you to hear. The Andes virus is the only hantavirus in the entire world scientifically documented to spread directly between human beings. Every other hantavirus on the planet requires a rodent. You have to inhale particles from infected rodent droppings or urine or saliva. But the Andes virus, under the right conditions of close sustained contact, can jump from one human to another. That is what happened on MV Hondius. That is what makes this outbreak categorically different from anything health authorities have dealt with involving hantavirus before. That is what makes the WHO Director General's careful words. The situation could change, and given the long incubation period, it is possible we might see more cases in the coming weeks. Sound far more ominous than they appear on the surface. And that is why what started as a luxury polar cruise is now a global public health event that has activated the CDC, the WHO, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, and health ministries across a dozen nations simultaneously. To understand the full weight of what is happening, you need to understand what hantavirus actually is and what it does to the human body. Hantaviruses are a family of more than 50 types of viruses carried primarily by rodents. They have existed alongside humans for thousands of years. Navajo oral tradition in the American Southwest actually references mass illness events in 1918, 1933, and 1934 that scientists now believe were caused by hantavirus outbreaks. But for most of modern medicine, hantavirus was considered a disease of Korea and Asia, a hemorrhagic fever with kidney complications that mostly affected soldiers in field conditions. During the Korean War in the early 1950s, more than 3,000 United Nations soldiers developed an unexplained illness with fever and kidney failure and hemorrhagic features. That disease was called Korean hemorrhagic fever. The case fatality rate was around 10%. Scientists knew something was killing people. They did not yet know what it was or where it came from. Everything changed on the morning of May 14, 1993. A 19-year-old Native American competitive marathon runner was driving through the Four Corners region of New Mexico, the area where New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah all meet, when he became so severely short of breath that his family pulled over at a roadside service station and called for help. This young man was in perfect health by every measure, a marathon runner, an athlete. He was dead within days, and his fiancée had died of a nearly identical unexplained respiratory illness just days before. When local investigators started looking, they found 5 more cases of young, otherwise healthy people who had died of sudden respiratory failure in the same area. The CDC was called in. Within weeks, they identified a previously unknown hantavirus, initially called Muerto Canyon virus and later renamed Sin Nombre virus, meaning no name virus in Spanish. The deer mouse was identified as the reservoir. An above average pinyon nut harvest the previous fall had driven a massive deer mouse population boom across the region. More rodents meant more virus exposure, By August 1993, around 30 cases had been identified in the southwestern United States. 20 of those 30 people died. The case fatality rate was nearly 70%. This moment fundamentally changed hantavirus medicine. Before 1993, hantaviruses were only associated with kidney disease. The Four Corners cases established hantavirus pulmonary syndrome as a completely distinct and terrifying clinical entity. The lungs, not the kidneys, and the death rates were catastrophic, but the Four Corners strain, the sin nombre virus, had one critical limitation. It could not spread from person to person. You needed a rodent. You needed to be in the right place at the right time, breathing contaminated dust from infected deer mouse droppings or urine or saliva. That limitation kept sin nombre from becoming a pandemic threat. And then scientists started looking at South America. In 1996, an outbreak in Argentina documented something that had never been seen before with hantavirus. A healthcare worker who had cared for hantavirus patients with no rodent exposure of any kind became infected. Then another. The investigation was meticulous. The conclusion was unavoidable. The Andes virus, endemic to Argentina and Chile and carried by the long-tailed pygmy rice rat, could spread directly from infected humans to other humans in close, prolonged contact. That finding was and remains unique to Andes virus. It is the only hantavirus on Earth with confirmed human-to-human transmission. And it was the Andes virus that was waiting in Argentina when the MV Hondius departed from Ushuaia on April 1st, 2026. The MV Hondius is owned by Dutch company Oceanwide Expeditions. It is a luxury polar expedition vessel with accommodation for up to 196 passengers across 95 cabins with a crew of 72. Berth prices on this voyage ranged from 14,000 to 22,000 euros. This was not a budget cruise. The people on board were affluent international travelers who had planned and saved for this trip for years. The ship departed from Ushuaia, the southernmost city in Argentina and the gateway to Antarctica, on April 1st, 2026, with approximately 175 passengers and crew of 23 nationalities aboard. Passengers came mostly from Spain, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The bulk of the crew came from the Philippines. The itinerary included Antarctica, the Falkland Islands, South Georgia Island, Nightingale Island, Tristan da Cunha, St. Helena, Ascension Island, and finally Cape Verde. It was a voyage to some of the most remote and spectacular places on the planet. But before several passengers even boarded in Ushuaia, the virus was already among them. The working hypothesis of WHO investigators based on current evidence is that the first patient, a 70-year-old Dutch man, most probably acquired his infection prior to boarding through environmental exposure during activities he conducted in Argentina before the cruise. He and his wife had been traveling in Argentina and into Chile before arriving in Ushuaia. Somewhere in that journey, possibly through contact with contaminated rodent dust in a field or rural area, the Andes virus entered his body. On April 6th, 5 days after the ship departed, the 70-year-old Dutch man began showing symptoms: fever, headache, diarrhea. These are the early signs of hantavirus infection, and they look almost identical to influenza. There was no reason to panic, no reason to isolate, no immediate alarm. He was just a sick passenger on a luxury cruise ship. But while his symptoms appeared routine, the virus was beginning its catastrophic assault on his lungs. On April 11th, he died aboard the ship after developing severe respiratory distress. His wife, the Dutch woman who had traveled with him through Argentina, also became infected. She also died. The couple who had saved and planned for a dream voyage to Antarctica died within days of each other on a ship in the South Atlantic Ocean, surrounded by some of the most remote waters on Earth. But by the time they died, the virus had already spread. The Andes virus requires close, sustained contact to transfer between humans. But on a cruise ship where passengers share dining rooms and common areas and narrow corridors and gathering spaces over weeks at sea, close contact is unavoidable. The WHO investigation found epidemiological links between the initial Dutch cases and subsequent cases among other passengers whose symptom onset clustered around the most likely incubation periods previously documented for Andes virus. Human-to-human transmission had occurred aboard the Hondius. The ship was becoming a vessel of contagion, drifting across the Atlantic Ocean with nowhere to go. On May 2, 2026, the WHO received notification from the United Kingdom's national IHR focal point regarding a cluster of severe acute respiratory illness, including 2 deaths and 1 critically ill passenger aboard the ship. The Cape Verdean government announced the creation of an isolation area and coordination of a multidisciplinary team. But Cape Verde was deemed not capable of handling the medical emergency. The ship remained anchored offshore for days. South African officials began contact tracing for the 30 passengers who had disembarked during the ship's earlier stop at St. Helena. Health officials in South Africa identified 62 potential contacts in that tracing effort. 42 were located and tested negative. 20 were still being traced, and some may have already traveled to other countries. Spain's health minister, Monica Garcia Gomez, announced on May 6th that despite the objections of the Canary Islands regional president, Spain approved the Hondius docking at Tenerife, citing its moral and legal obligation to the passengers. The Swiss government confirmed a man infected with hantavirus was being treated in Zurich. The CDC issued a level 3 emergency response, its highest tier. The ECDC in Europe classified all people on board as high-risk contacts and mandated monitoring and quarantine for up to 42 days from May 10th. The Hondius arrived in Tenerife on May 10th. Passengers disembarked. Evacuation flights repatriated people to 6 European countries and Canada, and now, as of this week, 11 total cases have been confirmed or suspected. 3 people are dead. Case fatality ratio stands at 38% based on confirmed cases. 1 French woman is in the Bichat Hospital in Paris on an artificial lung, an ECMO machine doing the work her damaged lungs can no longer do. Dr. Xavier Lescure, an infectious disease specialist at Bichat, described her condition as a severe form of the disease that has caused life-threatening lung and heart problems. A Spanish passenger tested positive after evacuation and is quarantined at a military hospital in Madrid. 1 case in the United States was flagged as inconclusive. 1 positive and 1 negative result from 2 different laboratories, and is being retested. That American is currently asymptomatic. Maria van Kerkhove, the WHO's chief of epidemic and pandemic preparedness and prevention, told journalists directly, "This is not the next COVID, but it is a serious infectious disease. Most people will never be exposed to this." WHO Director General Tedros added, "At the moment, there is no sign that we are seeing the start of a larger outbreak, but of course, the situation could change." The incubation period for Andes virus is 1 to 8 weeks. The ship arrived in Tenerife on May 10th. That means the final possible date for new cases to emerge from onboard exposure extends all the way to late June 2026. Any passenger who was on that ship and has not yet developed symptoms is not yet in the clear. The question that scientists cannot yet answer with certainty is how widely the virus spread among the 147 people who were still aboard when the WHO was first notified. The gene sequencing published on virological.org
showed that sequences from 5 patients,
2 from Johannesburg, 2 from the Netherlands, and 1 Swiss case, are all very similar to each other, suggesting a single original zoonotic spill from a rodent to the first patient, followed by human-to-human transmission chains aboard the ship. The genetics are telling the epidemiological story. Now, the 3 scenarios for where this goes. The first scenario is contained outbreak. The 42-day monitoring period reveals no additional cases beyond those already identified. The French woman on the artificial lung recovers. The incubation windows close without new infections emerging in the community. The MV Hondius outbreak becomes a significant but isolated chapter in hantavirus history. Scientists learn from it, public health systems document it, and the world moves on. This is the scenario that the WHO and CDC are cautiously working toward. The second scenario is delayed cluster emergence. The long incubation period means some exposed passengers who felt fine during repatriation begin developing symptoms in late May or June. New cases appear in countries that believe themselves clear of the outbreak. Healthcare workers treating those cases without full personal protective equipment, N95 respirators, gowns, gloves, eye protection, airborne isolation rooms become secondarily infected. The outbreak grows slowly but persistently across multiple countries over the following weeks. This scenario is within the realm of possibility given what we know about Andes virus transmission dynamics. The third scenario is the one nobody wants to discuss. A passenger who was exposed on the ship but who remained asymptomatic during the 42-day window, or whose infection was simply not detected, passes the virus to a close household contact in an unmonitored community setting. That contact infects another. The chain extends. And a pathogen that kills nearly 4 in 10 people it infects begins circulating in a population with zero immunity and zero established treatment protocol. This scenario is not probable, but it is not impossible. And the difference between improbable and impossible matters enormously when the mortality rate is 38%. Here's what I want you to understand as we close this analysis. The MV Hondius hantavirus outbreak is not COVID-19. The WHO is right about that. The Andes virus does not spread as easily as SARS-CoV-2. It requires sustained close contact. It does not float through the air of a subway car or a shopping mall. The absolute number of cases right now is small. 11. 3 deaths. In a world of 8 billion people, that is statistically microscopic. But there are 3 facts about this outbreak that should keep every global health authority on maximum alert. First, and this is the largest documented outbreak of Andes Hantavirus ever recorded involving international travelers across multiple continents simultaneously. Second, with a 38% case fatality rate, every single new case that slips through the monitoring net is potentially a death. And third, we are still inside the incubation window. We do not yet know how many more cases this outbreak will ultimately produce. The experts who know this virus best, people like Dr. Gregory Mertz, Emeritus Professor at the University of New Mexico, who has studied hantavirus for decades, say plainly that this outbreak will teach us more because we have had very few of these events with more than a handful of patients. We are learning in real time on a global stage with human lives in the balance. My question for you today is this: does the world have enough early warning infrastructure to catch the next outbreak before it becomes the next pandemic? Or does it always take bodies to build the systems that should have existed before the first death? Write your answer in the comments because I want to read exactly what you think. If you believe global health surveillance needs radical improvement after what you just heard, say so. And if this kind of clear-eyed analysis that goes beyond the headlines and actually explains what is happening and why it matters is what you have been looking for, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. The world does not wait for you to catch up, but this channel will make sure you never fall behind. See you in the next video.